What game is this line from?
Monster kill.
What about this line?
An ally has been slain.
How about this one?
Double kill.
The likelihood is you were able to at least identify one of the game franchises from these lines. You might have even been able to identify the specific game just from these voice lines. All of these voice lines are iconic for different reasons, but the thing that links them all together is that they're not said by any character in the game world. So, let's talk about announcers. The job of an announcer is to let people know what is currently happening so that everyone can be kept on the same page. Announcers can cover a wide range of different topics though. The person who sets up the events of the movie for the audience could be seen as an announcer. A play-by-play commentator for a sporting event is announcing to the viewers what is happening. If you really want to stretch it out, even an anime character explaining their attack could be seen as an announcer. But in the realm of video games, announcers have one vital goal, and it's to let the players know exactly what is going on. In the most basic sense, this lets all of the players get on the same page and understand what is happening or what just happened. For new players who are learning a game, it can sometimes be hard to follow along with everything that's going on. However, if there's someone screaming at the top of their lungs, "The enemy team is currently fucking you right now!" it's much easier for them to understand that some things aren't going well right now. However, the keen-eyed among you will have noticed that the announcers do much more than just inform players and have actually become ways to enhance the game's experience for the people playing them. Getting a bunch of kills in Halo feels good, but it feels so much better when the announcer goes,
Kilimanjaro.
and if you were to ask me, there is no other genre that quite masters the feeling of a dude screaming in your ears while you do sick stuff than fighting games. The fighting game announcer has been a staple of the genre basically since the games were even created. Back in the Street Fighter 2 days, we had an extremely grizzled announcer who sounded like he's recording every word of his sentence individually. To be fair, he probably was. Ever since then, the fighting game announcer has evolved from just a way to tell players which round they're on to a way to enhance the game experience. If we were to still look at Street Fighter and move up just one game from Street Fighter 2 to Street Fighter 3, we go from things like
Round one, fight.
to
Into the heat of battle. Go for it.
These phrases both mean the exact same thing. However, the way they're said gives off very different tones that match the feelings of these games. The announcers enhance the characteristics of the game that are already there and help solidify the themes and moods of the game. And today I want to honor that job and talk about some of the best announcers in fighting games. This isn't a ranked list or anything, this is just examples of amazing work from these games that I think need some more recognition from the fighting game community and just gamers in general. So without further ado, let's begin with something absolutely iconic.
Soul Calibur.
Soul Calibur has one of the most recognizable announcers in fighting game history. I'm not the biggest Soul Calibur player, but back when I was a wee lad, I used to have Soul Edge for the PS1, and I distinctly remember the feeling of grandiose and epic fantasy that the game emitted, and a large part of that was thanks to the announcer. The way he enunciates all of his words with a clear and powerful voice makes it feel like you're in a fantasy movie being retold to an audience. Even the lines he uses for winning and losing make it sound like the fight was going to determine the fate of the world.
Ivy was seriously wounded, but the soul still burns. This victory strengthened the soul of Inferno.
Not to mention that this game has some of the most iconic lines in fighting game history.
Welcome back to the stage of history. A tale of souls and swords eternally retold.
Soul Calibur's announcer has practically stayed unchanged since the first game, and that's because they absolutely nailed it from the start. Even if you don't like Soul Calibur, you gotta love this guy. Keeping with 3D games that started on the PlayStation 1, Tekken has had several amazing announcers over the course of its many games. Every Tekken announcer is amazing in its own way, with the earlier games going for a very rough and seemingly otherworldly type of announcer,
Good morning.
and the newer games seem to go for more of a professional broadcaster voice, which is easier to understand.
Good morning.
While I'm personally not a fan of the direction that the announcers have taken in the newer Tekken games, I can still commend them for doing an amazing job. Tekken 7's announcer in particular is very easy to listen to, which is good because you're going to be hearing
Get ready for the next battle.
a lot from him. But with the older games, there's just a sense of roughness and mystery with the announcer. Tekken 3's announcer in particular has a voice that sounds like gravel, and the compression just adds to the charm of his lines. It doesn't exactly sound like he's commentating a match for an audience as much as he's an all-powerful being trapped inside of a McDonald's toy.
The king of Iron Fist Tournament.
If you want my personal opinion though, the best announcer for any Tekken game is absolutely the announcer from Tekken Tag Tournament 1. He keeps the distortion and roughness from the earlier Tekken games, but he's still quite easy to understand and nice to listen to, though it doesn't sound like he's announcing for an audience.
Good morning. Cool.
Even when he's being nice to you, there's just something about his voice that makes him sound off in the best kind of way. Or maybe it's just because he has a line that sounds like Donkey Kong.
Okay.
How can we talk about Tekken if we don't instantly jump back to Street Fighter, though? Street Fighter has had a lot of games with a lot of different iconic announcers. In fact, some of these announcers are so iconic they made their way into other pieces of media. It took me so long to find out which game this was from, you have no idea. But if you ask me, there is one announcer from Street Fighter that stands way above the rest in quality. When Street Fighter 4 came out, they had this announcer.
And the battle begins! Are you ready? Who will come out on top?
I do think he does an okay job, but not much more than that. He doesn't exactly sound engaged, and his voice lines don't exactly pack a punch. But I will say he has an absolute killer knockout call.
KO!
But around the time of Super Street Fighter 4, we ended up getting this guy instead.
It all comes down to this. Fight!
Now that's what I call packing a punch with your lines. The Ultra Street Fighter 4 announcer manages to pull off sounding like a commentator that knows what he's talking about, while still making it seem like you've been shoved into a fight pit with a dude that's throwing fireballs from his hands. If the vanilla Street Fighter 4 announcer is your friend on the sofa trying to big up the fight while it's happening, Ultra Street Fighter 4's announcer is the dude in the booth with a mic yelling to the crowd while trying to make it sound epic. Some of these lines are just dumb, and I love them so much.
Beautiful! That's the only word worthy of such strength! The world is holding its breath in anticipation! I've never seen anything like this! Decisive strength! Who can resist such power?
Every time I hear this announcer, I feel like I'm ready to get in there and kick some ass, and I absolutely love him. If only I knew how to play Street Fighter. You know what game I do know how to play, though? Guilty Gear is a franchise that is known for one thing above everything else. It's absolutely banging music tracks. Because of this, the announcers of Guilty Gear don't get as much recognition as other aspects of the game, which is unfortunate because I would say in basically every Guilty Gear game, the announcers are doing an amazing job. While I do think that Plus R is the weakest of the group that we'll be talking about today, I'm not including Missing Link, it's still extremely iconic after you hear it, and even in later games when I roam and cancel, I can still hear the announcer saying, "Romantic," in the back of my head. Strive's announcer is also very good. They do a great job of enhancing the game and making everything feel epic. The reverb on all of the lines adding that extra layer to each of his words and enhancing everything that he says. While he doesn't talk much during the match, the things that he says are legitimately important, and his delivery makes them feel important. Not to mention, the intro is just a... Mwah!
Mankind knew that they cannot change society. So instead of reflecting on themselves, they blamed the beasts.
And while Strive and XR do share an announcer, it is literally the same voice actor, I do think XR just slightly edges ahead of Strive, just barely. I feel like his performance in XR is more upbeat and excited compared to Strive, and when you hit low HP, you just hear the, "It's not over yet. And that just makes me feel like, you know what, maybe I actually can make this comeback. Speaking of upbeat, Skullgirls has possibly the most striking theme of any fighting game out there. Looking like an old cartoon, having an absolutely bopping jazz-inspired soundtrack, and some of the craziest mix-ups in the entire genre, Skullgirls has carved out a niche for itself in the fighting game community. And the way that the announcer enhances this absolutely adds to the feel of the game. Going for an old-timey radio host voice, the announcer does an amazing job of setting the scene of the fight with some absolutely crazy lines.
This is Tuna with Bacon. Quit lollygagging. Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime.
And while this announcer does an absolutely amazing job enhancing the theme on his own, I can't bring up Skullgirls without talking about the alternative announcers that you can get. Now, obviously, Skullgirls isn't the only game that lets you change the announcer, but I do think that the alternative announcers in Skullgirls are absolute standouts compared to the entire genre. The female announcer does an amazing job of getting you hyped for the fight, and is a nice contrast to the male announcer, having a much more upbeat and peppy attitude rather than a radio host vibe.
Oh, would you look at the time? This is Tuna with Bacon? Gentlemen and ladies, it's showtime!
You do also have the option of having any of your favorite characters be the announcer, but easily the best announcer is the day's announcer, which is just the male announcer who's just as drunk as a skunk.
Can I just say something? I love you guys. Should we take this outside? Are we outside? That was really... Take 3, take 4, take 5, take 6, take 7. Hey, great job. Listen, can I get a ride home? Yes. Yeah. Closing time? I say when I've had enough. Big dude. Cerebella, the one with the arms. Philia, I think. Peacock. Parasol. Is that a zombie? Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime.
I absolutely fucking love this announcer pack. Holy shit. It's hard to go over this topic without bringing up what might be possibly the most iconic fighting game announcer of all time.
Round 1. Fight!
I'm gonna be real. I'm not a big fan of Mortal Kombat. Newer old NRS games just don't really click with me, but even I can't deny the absolute impact that this announcer has for these games. There is a reason that Mortal Kombat has had basically the same announcer for every mainline game since it came out, and that's because of just how iconic the announcer is. I don't even need to say anything. I don't need to put anything on the screen. I don't even need to play the clip. You can already hear the announcer in the back of your head. But I'm gonna play it anyway.
Finish him. Fatality.
It is so simple, yet so effective. It doesn't have anything massive to try and set the tone, there isn't much flair going on. It's just rough and gritty, and it sets the scene so well. It is the voice of the final boss of the game, to be fair, so it makes sense that it would sound as dark as it does, but it just works so well. It is so iconic and easily one of the greatest fighting game announcers of all time. But it's not my favorite.
Killer Instinct.
Killer Instinct is one of the fighting game community's darling games. Anyone who's even had a slight run-in with this game will sing its praises all the way to the edge of the earth and back. And there is one thing above everything else in this game that players praise endlessly. Above the visuals, above the gameplay, above the soundtrack, above all of it stands the most iconic and arguably important part of Killer Instinct. Riptor. I'm a fucking dinosaur! The announcer for Killer Instinct is doing so much for the game, you would think that the developers were holding his family hostage, and if he didn't scream his heart out and give it his all, they'd be dead within the month. The Killer Instinct announcer not only brings the rough grit we've seen from several fighting games, but he brings a rising tension as more and more important things happen in the game. Starting out, his combo calls are pretty tame. Still sounding amazing, but not doing anything crazy.
Basic, solid, awesome, triple, quad.
But as the combos get bigger and bigger, the voice lines get more and more intense.
Killer, king, insane, hyper, extreme, godlike.
And then we start getting to the really hype moments.
Combo breaker! Counter breaker! Shadow counter!
And of course, the absolutely insane shout that the game is most known for.
Ultra!
The Killer Instinct announcer is not only able to do a great job, he is the string that ties the entire game together. Killer Instinct isn't Killer Instinct without the announcer, because the events that happen in the game have much less of a kick without him there. Announcing can be something that we take for granted as we play these games. However, every single one of them brings much needed character and flair to these games that then help to define their own identity among the other games of the genre. There are a lot of fighting games that I wasn't able to talk about today, and if I missed any of your favorites, then let me know in the comments or on my Twitch where I'm live right now. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week. As always, a very special thanks to 64MHz, Almost Nap Time, Brudikai, Daniel Wiedericht, Games.png, Lady Dantalon, Melodically Me, Monax, Nhoa, Proxicon, Ray W, Super, Tom Tanks, and Zandatsu for being Tier 2 patron supporters.